Talkopolis programming is sponsored in part by the Vein Center, now celebrating 10 years service in Nashville, Tennessee. Hi guys, I'm Kane Harrison and I'm delighted to let you all know about this fantastic new show. We have a joint venture between Talkopolis and Serious Startups, and we're going to brand this show as Serious Startups. And today we welcome our fantastic troupe of guest hosts who will be here each and every week. They've all had their entrepreneurial experiences and startup experiences with Dave Ledgerwood.
Yes, sir.
The man who smokes cigars, who we love so much. Monica Selby and John Maddox down the end. Welcome guys, first and foremost.
Thanks for having us here.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Looking forward to it.
John, now you and I got together at Dev Digital there and we talked about a show like this that we could get off the ground. I spoke about talking about the grassroots and bootstrapping, all this stuff that we do in Nashville from an entrepreneurship standpoint. And we both found some common ground and we thought, let's get these guys on board and let's start talking about what actually goes on. So mate, talk about your vision first and foremost for what we want to try and achieve here.
Really for me, it's all about sharing knowledge and the nuts and bolts of what it takes to be successful. There's so much esoteric stuff that's tossed out all the time with and traditional startup accelerator models and just things you can read online and different podcast series and whatnot. They're great and they're very inspirational and give people the energy and that spark to go out and do it the first go around. But what happens after you launch? What happens after you're trying to raise capital or cash flow magically starts to degrade and you're having emergencies to be successful in business, not just the startup side? And for me, I really wanted to, as we talked about it, really find a way to showcase that grassroots element of information and training and just sharing knowledge to help people become more successful and learn more about you guys and everything you have going on and the capabilities. It seemed like a kind of a no-brainer to do a joint venture together on the show. Yeah,
it seemed like a really good mix. Let's talk about, obviously everyone at home is familiar with our Talkopolis distribution model, and to have a video platform like this to be able to get these guys some information is absolutely awesome. Tell us a little bit about Serious Startups though.
Sure.
In itself.
Serious Startups resides online, SeriousStartups.com, and then obviously our battery of social properties. And where it came from is John had an original business called Serious Startups where he was doing startup development and investing and developing joint venture products. And John and I met online on Twitter and connected, and we decided that people needed to know about the various experiences and topics and all the things that happen to you right at that starting point in those early stage companies where it's difficult and I don't know all the things and what happens here and there, and there's all kinds of educational models. So I come out of the accelerator space and we wanted to talk about that, and we started doing a podcast and we did 20 something episodes, and we got a whole lot more downloads than we thought we would. So we sort of realized that we had an interesting perspective there, and we wanted to keep embracing that, and the feedback came back really well and said this is a really important piece of education and people wanted that. So, well, that's cool, let's think about how to distribute that more, and we started out on our own doing that, and as luck would have it, our friend Monica here was working on Niblets.com, and we got to talking about the opportunities to combine those audiences, and then we did that. So we've just finished executing the acquisition of Niblets.com and its properties with Serious Startups brand, and Monica knows the rest of the story.
Yeah, and Monica, talk about it, because I know that you and I briefly talked about it, but you actually went through one of those processes, I guess, that a lot of entrepreneurs do go through in this little takeover, if you will, for the want of better words. Talk us through that a little bit and how you felt.
Yeah. So that was really great. I knew David from when I first moved to Nashville, and he had introduced me to John. I had been on the podcast, so I had gotten to experience
celebrity status.
Status, right.
She said we made her nervous. Can you believe that?
I can't believe it. I mean, it's unbelievable.
No, y'all never make me nervous, trust me.
Right.
I think she calms you two down, and I feel like she's going to calm this panel down.
That's absolutely true.
The voice of reason as we move forward, by the way.
That's absolutely right. So at Niblets, we covered startups everywhere else or outside of Silicon Valley. And so we really, my co-founder Nick and I both had some experience in startups in general, and so we understood kind of what entrepreneurs all over the country and around the world were facing. And so we focused, we tried to be a media company in particular, sharing news, acquisitions, that kind of thing. But we were both starting to focus a little bit more on the education of startups, because what we found was everybody wanted to be the next Silicon Valley. They wanted to completely take the Silicon Valley model and transplant it to Nashville or Cincinnati or wherever. Yeah. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way in other cities, because Silicon Valley investors want you to get users. They want eyeballs. Other investors want money. So we were starting to pivot into more educational space when I sat down with David, and it all kind of made sense to merge and go work on it together.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. I think because we're all in Nashville, obviously, and that's where our businesses essentially reside. And now the focus has really come onto Nashville probably in the last few years more than ever. But I feel that the word entrepreneurship, and from me being a musician as well, it's almost become that. Like, I want to be the next big thing. And the word itself has almost lost its meaning that it's been thrown around so much, I feel like, anyway, in this town. Right. And I actually wrote on Facebook a little while ago in some comments that some other people had written, but when I first moved to Nashville, everyone was a musician, and now every waiter is an entrepreneur. Right. It goes hand in hand.
Right, which is exactly like in the Valley, right? Yeah.
Right.
You're not a songwriter, you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah, it's exactly right. So the entrepreneur climate here, I think, has changed so much. John, chime in. I see you nodding your head over there.
I was just agreeing with you.
Come on, mate. You can be a little bit more outspoken than that. No.
Oh. Continue.
I think that's right, and I see good to that musicians understand that they're not just making music, that they're building a business, building a brand. But obviously, we also see a lot of, like you said, it's almost lost its meaning. We see a lot of dilution, and there's nothing more annoying than everybody just assuming I'm an entrepreneur and therefore I'm building the next billion-dollar company. When that's just not reality. That's not even reality in the Valley. Those are the stories we hear, not the stories that are really happening every single day.
Yeah, and I think that's what it's pegged against, and I think you bring up a good point in what is your level of success. And everyone's level of success is different. Obviously the billion-dollar goal is fantastic and world domination, but that's not what everyone wants out of starting, out in business to begin with.
No, there are lifestyle businesses, and there are consulting companies, and my own story is really being able to support myself and my family doing what I want to do and getting paid for that for 8 years now. And I think that's entrepreneurial success. Would I like to get a multi-million, billion-dollar exit? That'd be all right.
Yeah.
But I'm not building too many businesses that look like that. What about a portfolio of 10 businesses that each pay out a fair amount of money each year? That's going to be okay too. And so there's a lot of ways to go about that. And while I've been on the side that seeks funding, I look at my story and say, you can build things that don't need funding also, and that's okay. And you get to then determine, maybe you created a really great cash flow mechanism and investors will approach you. And that's a lot better position to be in than, hey, I'm 60 days from running out of money and it would be great if you gave me yours.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to be hard.
That's a great point right there. Like, the life of a venture-backed startup founder kind of sucks. Like, you're not making any money, you have investors breathing down your neck, you have a team that you're not experienced enough to manage most of the time, you have a product that you probably don't really know how to get to market, and you're running out of money all the time. The clock's ticking all the time.
And everyone always says it, that moment that you don't need an investor, that's when they turn up. You've done all that hard work, and then all of a sudden. But that's why I always draw so many correlations between the music business. It's the same. We're going to jump in a van and drive across the country with a bunch of people who stink, and then, so let's see what we can do. And it's the same thing. The instant that you get success, and I actually feel that in Nashville, that, there's almost an independent entrepreneurship now, where there's a move away from trying to chase that big money, because for so long I think that the outside dollars have been focused on healthcare in Nashville specific. It's been really hard to bang those doors down and get into those tech dollars. What's your experience?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. From the accelerator space, we would tend to find that it's harder to fund an early stage tech venture than you might like. It's a discriminating group of investors in Nashville specifically, and a lot of cities are like this. So, you know, these are a lot of people that made a tremendous amount of money on brick and mortar healthcare.
Right.
And I'm a financial advisor too, right? So would I go to someone and say, you know, I think you should take all your money and invest in a thing that you completely don't understand and is really different than what you made your money on? You know, why would you do that? Why would I risk a huge pile of my own money to, you know, sort of advance the greater good of a business I don't understand? So I think we face maybe a generational gap that, you know, ultimately there will be some other different types of exits in Nashville, and then some of that money will come back and start to support more tech companies. But, you know, it's also a misnomer to say companies aren't getting funded here.
No, that's true.
They are.
They
you know,
are.
there's a number of multi-million-dollar raises, but we maybe don't have the news hype and infrastructure behind that to tell you about that. But what I find in the Southeast is generally the model in the Southeast is do something that solves a real problem, and it might be kind of ugly, but you'll make a bunch of money, and then people will want to invest in that because they want to invest in a cash flow stream and ROI. And so really the feedback that I get from other areas of the country is like, you all are solving real problems in the Southeast and making businesses that make money on solving real problems. So it might be manufacturing or, you know, transportation and logistics, sometimes healthcare. You know, these maybe are unsexy things that are $100 million businesses, and that's okay.
That's fine, exactly right.
Right.
Hey, John, I want to ask you a question. So I'm a complete outsider, obviously. I'm from the deep south. And so coming in, I see a lot of cultural differences, like in everything that we do, even though we look the same. I talk a little bit funny, but there's a lot of things we do exactly the same. But culturally, I know, and this sprung to mind when I went out to San Francisco recently and had to pitch to a bunch of VCs out there. They're a lot more liberal in their thinking as well, and probably not as conservative in their thinking. And I think the Southeast, as a culture, has been bred to be conservative as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'd say that's definitely true. But I think a significant portion of not being able to overcome that conservatism is lack of aggression, specifically in the startup community. If you're also conservative, you're much less likely to be aggressive going after the funding, but also in context of all the stuff we're talking about on the nuts and bolts and really figuring out the business models and revenue streams and things of that nature. One of the things that I've run into personally, which it goes over well in Silicon Valley, but not well in the conservative space, is baseline questions of what's your revenue model? Oh, well, you know, we're going to figure that out later after we get a bunch of users. Well, then you're going to run into, by default here in the South, what I always jokingly call a Gordian knot conundrum. I need investor money to build a prototype. I need the prototype to get the investment dollars to achieve these proverbial users that are going to justify the investment.
Right, and the possibility of those users can't be proved out. We have an education gap, I think, on how to do an MVP the right way and really get out there and manually prove a business model prior to needing. You often don't need that investor money to build that out and test it. And so I think there's a lean startup education gap that you would find typically in the Valley. People might have money, but they're also trying, you know, like what's the story with Angry Birds? You know, those guys had 51 iterations. 51 games that failed, and they ran out of money, and they said, well, let's just do one more, and it was Angry Birds. You know, and nobody tells that stuff. You know, that's minimum viable.
I disagree with you. I think everybody tells that stuff.
Well, maybe.
We failed 51 times, and then we did one more, and that was the winner.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that's where I see too many people going too long and not being wise about calling it. You know, sometimes you just have to stop. And
but then there wouldn't be Angry Birds.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say the world would be okay without
that. And 4-year-olds everywhere would be bothering parents.
Wouldn't they just?
And I get it, and like that's a great story, and we love to glamorize that, but I mean.
I love that story.
Well, congratulations.
Well, I think the glamorization also falls back into the nuts and bolts part of it, especially in the startups in general, but especially in tech. As my background as a vendor, developing startups, helping to market, grow, all that stuff. thing that drove me absolutely nuts was the misconception of what an MVP actually was. And that, hey, this is not just a, hey, we're going to build this prototype and everything's going to magically happen and James Earl Jones is going to make a quote and say, if you build it, they will come. And now the investors are going to start pouring out their money. That's just, that's not reality. And I think from an education standpoint, to ultimately overcome the conservatism we're talking about, all those things, you really have to take into account what's stage one, what's stage two, and stop becoming obsessed with trying to compartmentalize every stage of your business model into version one. And hey, let's get out there, let's see if it works, let's prove market viability, and then the probability of investment dollars coming, and us being able to actually ever have a prayer of building out these additional stages and achieving that glorified success. I think the Angry Birds example of 51 chances of failure is actually much more commonplace than is what's talked about and what's publicized, and all the great successful startups where they got acquired by Google or are generating $100 million or $5 million. There were failures along the way. How big they were varies, but there was always something you faced. And if you don't tell entrepreneurs that that's the reality, what's going to face them, it's all going to be hunky-dory and gravy, then when they get that proverbial punch in the face that knocks them down, that get turned down by investor number one, well, a significant portion of them don't go and talk to investor number two. And then it gets blamed on conservatism in the South and all these different regions.
That's true.
But that's just the truth in Silicon Valley or here.
Right.
You might be lucky and get in front of the liberal, to your point, investor who likes it and says, hey, cool. Hey, I lost $2 million at the craps table in Vegas last week. What's $500,000? I'm in. Let's do it. Let's see if it works, right?
Yeah.
And I think a prime example of that is the Yo app. They got $1 million. And the thing that continues to flabbergast me about that one, and I apologize to the investor who wrote the check for the statement, but as part of the pitch, the developer of it said, I spent 8 hours writing this app. And then he got $1 million.
Yeah.
Okay. And if he can write in 8 hours, there's a boatload of other people can write in 8 hours. How in the heck do you justify $1 million and then turn down things that have flushed out business models, recurring revenue, that's developed, you've already got proven market viability and beta clients and all that stuff? What the heck? And the reason I say all this is that I think people will try to become very formulaic in their business growth models. And while there are tactics that can work successfully, coming up with the variations on them based on the human psychology of the person you're going after, I think that's the most important thing to be accounted for in anything that you do, life in general, but especially in developing out a startup. Who are the people I'm going after and how do they think? And then leveraging logical reasoning to figure out how to create the emotional response that you're looking for, which in context of raising capital would be getting them so hyped up about it and buying into your passion for the idea they write a check. Or at a minimum, are interested enough in it that they can say, all right, I'll take that risk and see what happens.
Well, this is some of the stuff we're going to be talking about each and every week with this fantastic group of people, Dave, Monica, and John. And this is called Serious Startups. And you'll be able to find this, of course, all across Facebook and at seriousstartups.com. And if you guys want to write in, and if there's anything you need us to talk about, then of course we'd love to have you engaged in the show. I think that we're going to do something really cool also and start picking some pitch videos, and we're going to put that at the end and showcase you guys. So if you have any and you want to send in, then you can also do that. So thanks, guys.
Yep.
Awesome.
Thanks
We
for
had
having
fun.
us.
First show, I think we did not too bad. We'll probably get better. Find our feet. We're bootstrapping it here, but we'll see you next time on Serious Startups.